Well, good evening all. Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar, Highett Gasworks Stage 2 Engagement and Reporting Back to the Community. It's a great pleasure to have so many of you with us here tonight. My name is Chris Robinson. I'll be your independent moderator tonight. For some of you, you may have seen me previously on some workshops we ran in mid-COVID, talking about best ideas for the Highett Gasworks, and it's great to have some of you back here this evening. My job tonight is to keep us going as best we can, to introduce you to our keynote speakers and to give you a really big opportunity this evening to perhaps pose some questions to our panellists and hear from them firsthand as to what they heard from you firsthand. That's a really important stage of this project. So, look, thank you all for joining us. Now, just in terms of some housekeeping, before we go any further, not housekeeping, but I'd certainly like to acknowledge that I'm calling in today from the Wurundjeri country. I'm in the city of Boroondara, and we're all calling in from different parts of Victoria, if not Melbourne tonight. So I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging from my area, and also perhaps also from those who are around the Highett Gasworks site as well. In terms of tonight, it's really straightforward. We'll be finishing at 7 p.m, so we've got lots to get through. But in terms of how we're going to run tonight, the housekeeping things, certainly some technical support is required. So I know some of you have reached out to Melissa and the team to make sure you've got the right technology tonight. If at all tonight you find that you are having difficulty with the technology or other such things, you can call Molly on the number that's there. And for those who aren't on a screen, it's 0428 382 813, and Molly and the team will do their best to make sure you're connected as quickly as possible. Now, you'll see some slides tonight, you'll see some images, there's going to be lots to cover, and I just want to make sure that everything you see tonight will be recorded. Well, there will be a video recording of tonight, of course. For those who can't be with us this evening, there'll be that. Also tonight, as I said, there's lots of slides, so they'll be presented online after tonight's forum, and you'll be able to go through them at your leisure and share them with your friends or colleagues. And as I said, there's questions and answers opportunity for this evening. So when you do think of a question, I'd encourage you to pop it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And because we'd like to know where you're from, and maybe it might be your name, that's so we can actually refer to your question when we put those questions to the panel. So you might be Harry from Highett. Do that if you could pop that in the question, and we'll refer to your question as best we can through this evening. So in terms of the agenda, it's pretty straightforward. In a moment, I'll be inviting Robert Stepandic, who's the Development Director at Development Victoria, to talk us through what he's learnt, big issues, maybe also some of the key messages he's heard from Hugh, and also with Richard Coffey, the Development Manager at Development Victoria. He'll be also talking through some of those insights as to what are we doing about that information. Now that we've heard this information, what are we going to use it for, and where we're at the stage of the project. So there'll be certainly a recap on those things. Now and then, about halfway through or thereabouts, we'll be opening up for questions. We've already received a few questions through online, so we've got a few to kick off with. But if you have others that are emerging tonight, don't hesitate to pop them through in your Q&A function. So in terms of our two speakers, we're delighted to have Robert and Richard here tonight. As I say, Robert Stepandic, the Development Director. He's a long-term servant of the development industry in Victoria, and he's got lots of experience and he knows what he's doing. Of course, Richard does as well. And they've been hands-on on this project from the start. So I think they've got great insights to share, and I'm looking forward to having a chat with them over the next 55 minutes. So without further ado, I know tonight we're going to be hearing about urban design and land use and transport and sustainability and things about heritage and cultural values and everything about placemaking, open space. We've got lots to cover. Robert, I'm going to invite you. Welcome to tonight's webinar. I'm going to invite you to formally kick off tonight's proceedings and talk us through what have you learnt, and perhaps then what are we going to do about it. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome to all those people that have made it tonight. I appreciate that you've taken the time out of your day, and hopefully the information that we do share with you, you consider as being valuable. I'm sure that there'll be some that will want more information, but there's a fair few slides and there's a lot of information to go through tonight, so hopefully we can answer some of those questions along the way. Just a bit of the order of the slide pack that we have. I'm going to go through 4 or 5 slides that are going to do a bit of a recap for some information that some of you who may have already seen that if you were present at the August-September presentation, but for others, it's really important that we do a bit of a recap on that information. Then I'm going to go into the survey and the messages and what we heard. And then Richard's going to follow through and start to explain how we're going to respond to some of that information, including some of the consultancy information that we've been collecting over the course of the last 3 to 6 months. So before I go into expanding on what Development Victoria is, I just want to highlight a key point is that our engagement process is going to expand a fair bit, or somewhat a bit more than what we originally thought, and I'll explain the reasons as to why that's the case. But the real reason for it is that we want the time to make sure we get this right. So with that, I'll go into the first slide of the recap slide, which is about Development Victoria. For those who don't know who we are a government entity that is responsible for undertaking urban renewal, property development and major projects on behalf of the Victorian government. We do specialise in 3 areas, and there's some examples there that you have in front of you. The first one is Melbourne Park, which is related to the civic side of our activities. We also have the Flinders Street Station refurbishment, which is the backdrop to Richard's slide there, as well as the Shrine and other civic projects. The property development section of our business generally delivers residential property. The project that you see there is the Cirque project in Point Cook. It's just recently finished. It's around 104 townhouses. The designer was Rothy Lohman. It was a very successful project. I think all the residents have moved in now, and there's some final landscaping works. Richard is also a key delivery member of that team as well. But it's one of our final projects, and there's a lot more along those lines. And finally, the precinct renewal example that we have there is Docklands. Just some interesting facts. It's only 65% complete. It houses close to 13,000 residents at the moment. And pre-COVID, you would have seen 65,000 people on a normal given working day if you were keen to count some numbers. Obviously, the things have changed in recent times. The next slide is the recap on the vision statement. We did present a vision statement at the last engagement session. It was a draft, and as it is on the left-hand side, it still remains a draft. What has been quite amazing is to see that the feedback that we've received in the engagement actually sings in lines with that vision statement, particularly the fact that the community was seeking a diverse community and one that was connected. That came through really, really strongly. Another component of that vision statement is that there's a need to design the spaces for not only the existing current residents, but also for future residents. And we know that brings about some change and a little bit of a tension when it comes to that change, but we'll need to navigate that through to make sure that we respond to the information that we've collected in the engagement process. The next recap slide is regards to the program. This has slightly changed from the one that we demonstrated at the last engagement session in August and September. And the key change there is that we're introducing another engagement phase. We did have only 3, but now we're introducing 4. And part of the reason for that is following the announcement of the suburban rail loop. We will need to work with the SRL or the Suburban Rail Loop to understand whether there are opportunities to align with the Highett Gasworks project. And it's really important that we work together to ensure a cohesive and coordinated government approach in seeking the best outcome for the community. And that's where we need a bit of extra time to make sure that we have further dialogue, to make sure that we include some of that broader thinking. But as a result of that, we won't have detailed plans to show you tonight, as the design really needs to remain flexible to allow for these broader precinct opportunities to be considered in their full light through the further conversations that we'll need to undertake, not just with the suburban rail loop, but also with the broader community. Richard will be going through some details and some drawings that do respond to the current development plan overlay requirements, that do respond to some of the engagement outputs that we've received to date, and also do respond to some of the consultancy information that we've collected over the course of the last few months. I'll just go through that timeline here and make a few key points before we go on to the next slide. It's worthy of note that in mid-2019, a development plan overlay was introduced by the Minister for Planning, and that was managed by the Department of Treasury and Finance. DV, or Development Victoria, has really only come into the play in 2020. And we've had that engagement session in August to September in 2020, which is where we're going to discuss most of the outputs today. We are in the blue section. November, December 2020 is the discussion that we're having at the moment. And the engagement sessions that we'll be having in 2021 were originally earmarked, or one of the engagement sessions was earmarked in early 2021 with the submission of the development plan not soon after that. What we're proposing to do now is to have that engagement session around mid 2021 and have another one later in 2021 when we're proposing to submit the development plan. The construction phase is still scheduled to commence around 2023, but this time it will be a bit later in 2023. So with that, I'll go on to the next slide, which is to talk about the development plan overlay, which is the one that was approved in 2019. The development plan overlay, it has a whole range of rules that the development plan needs to follow. It's a guideline that we should adhere to. This diagram is probably the most important component of that development plan overlay. And it's really important that we go through some of this now, because the information that Richard will go through relates to this plan. And I'm just going to highlight 4 key components for those who aren't familiar with this. The first one is the dotted line that runs parallel with the rail line there. That's earmarked for a public bike access pass through the site to ensure connectivity through that site. That's the key. It's the first key one. The second one is the different shading represents the height limits that we are required to design in accordance with. The lower levels are on the north part of the site, top of the page, with changes of heights throughout the rest of the site. The other key component is the arrows that represent the locations as to which they're expecting access of cars and people. So there's 4 points. If you can see those arrows, the silver arrows that are nominated around the boundaries. I will highlight that I understand that Remington Drive is a private carriageway at the moment, and there'll be further conversations that need to happen to make that accessible in the future. The other point that I wish to make is the chimney in the middle of the site, which is that white diamond. That has actually had a significant impact on how we go about to design this design the solution to this site, and Richard will expand on that a bit further. The key thing to remember there is that under the development plan overlay, there needs to be a view line of that chimney from the Peen Highway and from William Fryer Reserve, and we'll explain how that impacts the design in due course. On the next slide is really just a summary to highlight that even though that we are really seeking to find solutions through some of the conversations that we've had with yourselves, we've also needed to seek information from consultants, and we will need to consider that information in parallel with the desires and needs of the community. So some of the things that we have already done is spoken to the traditional owners. We've got arborist reports, soil investigations. Sustainability is really a key component of who we are. We do seek to deliver higher standards than your traditional developer. It's certainly part of the policy drive within Development Victoria. So we do spend a lot of time in making sure we get that right. As to with the landscape principles, we also need to make it commercially viable as well. So there is some, there has been some very basic modelling done to make sure that we're not going too far into the realms of the impossibility. And also the affordable housing component is a key one, noting that the development plan overlay requires a 10% of affordable housing. So let's move on to the survey. This is just really a summary of the amount of connection points, how the information was distributed, and the numbers of the people that should have had access to the information presented. Just noting on the left-hand side, just 2 key points there. There was 2,200 postal drops, and about 140,000 touch points in social media. So we did try as hard as we could to get the information out there. On the right hand side, kind of demonstrates some of the information channels. The one for me that was really outstanding, I think, was the survey information. We know that the survey that we did put out was very detailed. The responses we received back was also equally very detailed and full of rich information. And if you were one of those people that contributed to that survey, thank you very much. There was some absolute gold in that, and we appreciate it. And also with the workshops that we undertook in the August, September, they were also great to hear some of the stories from some of the local residents. Okay, so that is all now contained in a report, all that information. This is just really showing you that we've analyze that information, and there's some scientific rigor behind it that kind of puts information in a very visual format to be reviewed. And if you are interested in understanding more of the detail, you can access this report as you can with the slides. There's a Q tag code there for you to download the report to read. I wasn't familiar with Q tags really until about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I'm assuming that's probably the same with most of the audience. So that will become available, but this is just highlighting some of the information that's available in that report. So what do we hear? What's the important aspects of the site? If I was to summarize it, from all my experience with having these engagement sessions on developments of similar scale, a lot of the outputs, or a lot of the feedback wasn't dissimilar to many of the other projects. However, there were some key differences. Probably the two or the strongest points that were made of all the information available to us was that, as I mentioned before, there is a very strong desire to have a diverse community, and human connection is essential. Essential through the site, and also essential to remain in the site and to make contact with other people. So they're probably the two key messages on that front, and that's what you really want us to make sure that we deliver on. The other key component, which is quite similar in other developments, is the traffic and car parking issues. The car park, traffic congestion, and safety regarding traffic is really important, and this site in particular has some really big challenges. We understand that there's some issues with the car parking on the service lane. We understand that there's some issues about people turning off Nepean Highway into that service lane. We understand the car parking issues related to the shopping centre and the law courts that are there as well. So there's some real challenges for us on that front, and that's something that we're very focused on. And there's also some interest and also some concern about the commercial spaces, and making sure that we do take in consideration about the other commercial uses that are available around the site. So with that, I'll go into those in more detail in a sec. I just want to cover off this slide very quickly. On the left-hand side, they were the key themes that we asked the audience about through that engagement process, and I won't go through those one by one at the moment because I'll go through those in more detail. I just do want to talk about the illustration on the right-hand side about I guess the complexities about this site. Every development site is complex. This one has very unique complexities about it, and there is quite a puzzle in some regards, and there are many pieces that we need to consider, and we're not going to get it right the first time. And I'm sure there'll be some things that the audience and I guess the public won't be interested in, but we're obviously saying that there is a two-way street here. We're open up to suggestions. There may be instances where you're very focused in one of those pieces in the puzzle. I guess all I'm suggesting here is to understand that also impacts someone else's desire on another piece of the puzzle to be joined up to the whole landscape. So it is quite complex. We are certainly aware of the complexity, but we're up for the challenge. But it's a question, I guess it's a statement for the broader audience to be patient with us as we work through the complexities of this site. So let's get into the juicy bits about what we heard. If we can get on to the next slide. So the first theme was the urban design and land use, and this one probably, and I won't go through all those points, but this one probably sung the hardest about wanting to make sure that we have that connection of the residents and the people that visit the site. So it's all about human connection in this one. So there's everyone's fan favorite is the cafe and the convenience store, but also there was a desire to have opportunities for open spaces where you could have markets and festivals and outdoor cinemas. Trees was a common theme that came through, and what you will probably find is a lot of these statements here did repeat through all the themes. So urban design and land use was really about human connection. The next one is transport and connectivity. As I mentioned before, car parking, congestion, and safety were big ones in here. One of the big one is also the entry points in the Nepean Highway, certainly concern and understandably so. There was also some interest in minimising the use of cars and, if possible, design the opportunities for that, which really sung to the 20-minute neighbourhood principle. And there was a lot of support for the 20-minute neighbourhood principle. It is a hard thing to deliver, but certainly achievable, but that's something that we'll need to work through. And there were some ideas about how we could manage the parking process by putting time limits on particularly on the service lane within the Peen Highway. Onto the third one, sustainability. No massive surprises in some of the feedback here. The two prominent things that probably came out was the desire for renewable energy development through solar on roofs, and also the capture and reuse of water was probably the two biggest ones that came through quite prominently. And as you can see through that list, there is one, which I'm going to use an example of, the shared spaces for gardens and laundries, which generally, due to the nature of the project, would be on the roof. And if I use the analogy of the jigsaw piece, it's very difficult to have all the solar energy on a roof, but if you want to have that space for the gardens and the laundries, you're going to compromise your ability to produce energy. So these are some of the challenges that we'll need to work through. The fourth one is the historical and cultural values. We all really enjoyed listening to many of the stories and in the conversations that we did have, but it was very clear that the story of the site, its historical use, needs to become a prominent feature in a design process, whether it be through street names, wayfinding. The chimney is obviously a key pillar in that discussion. And there's also some interest in ensuring that industrial nature of the old gasworks is incorporated in the future design process. So they're things that we can work with. And we've also had some conversations with the traditional owners. They have been amazing. There's some great ideas, and hopefully soon we'll be able to share those with you in due course. On to the fifth theme, on place and activation. Interestingly, if you look through all those items there, the key message there is safety. Safety in being able to access through the site in day and night, ensuring that there's no minimal opportunities for graffiti to occur, making sure the traffic is taken care of so that there's no issues with accessing and walking past through the roads, and also ensuring that there's accessibility for all levels of society. Particularly note of the need to design for dementia-friendly environments, noting that is a vastly increasing issue as we age longer effectively. But safety is the key message there, and that's been understood well and clear. And the last one we have is the public open space and landscaping. We know that this is an incredibly important component for many people. So the thing that probably came clear is there was a very strong push for the picnic areas, but generally having some activity that could be occurring on these sites was predominantly was mentioned. And there is quite a large shopping list of open space uses, which creates some vastly complexity for us. And I'll probably just go on to the next slide. So previously, it was listed a whole range of activities, and this is kind of summarising in illustrative form some of the ideas that have been put forward. And as you can see, there's quite a few, and working out what the right mix is and how they all fit within the broader jigsaw piece is going to be a challenge, but it's certainly one that we're up for. But it's just probably highlighting that there is quite a complex arrangement of uses, and ensuring that we can design it so we can have flexibility to allow all these things to occur is something that we're certainly driving towards. So with that, I will now pass on to Richard, who will go through and describe how we're addressing some of these findings.
Thank you, Robert. Before I hand over to Richard, I might step in and just remind everyone that if you've got some questions that are burning, pop them into the Q&A. We've got some coming through already, so thanks for those. Just a reminder, put your name and where you're from, and I'll do my best at the end of Richard's detailed discussion as to get through so many of those as possible. So thanks, Robert, and over to you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Robert, for the introduction there. So As Rob indicated, I'm just going to go through a little bit of the detail in terms of how those responses that we've heard to date can be reflected on the development plan, which, as Rob's alluded to, is very much a work in progress at this stage. But first, the first theme that I wanted to look at is just in terms of how we're actually considering the public open space and the landscaping on the site. Now, to date, our work has primarily been focused on working within the parameters of the development plan overlay. That development plan overlay requires 11.6% of the site value to be provided as a combination of land and infrastructure. So the development plan overlay outlines that could include a local level playground and one or potentially two neighbourhood size open spaces that would be accessible to people of all abilities and of a fairly high amenity. We've obviously got the chimney, well located in the centre of the site, which, as you can see there on the screen, is the red dot. And that's obviously very well suited to have the larger of the public open spaces surrounding it, with the chimney becoming very much a focal point of the entire site. We've also got, to the south of that, linking into Sir William Fry Reserve, we're looking at key landscaping sort of arm that ties into William Fry Reserve and sort of draws people in from the reserve into the site, into that central landscaping area. That access to William Fry Reserve is probably even more important now with obviously the recent announcement of the suburban rail loop in Sir William Fry. And so that's a real great opportunity and a real key access point into the site. There's a circle just to the north there. That is at this stage proposed to be a local level playground, accessible to residents, but also anyone outside of the Highett Gasworks site. And those arrows from the railway line, we envisage at this stage that most likely along the railway line there will be built form buildings, and we will need some sort of breaks through those buildings, and that's sort of what those arrows represent there. So they will be sort of green links, pocket parks you might call them, that would tie from the cycling corridor that will be running along the railway line into the site. I'll just go on to the next slide now. So the next theme I wanted to talk about was just in terms of access and movement throughout the site. So when we engaged previously, there was still some uncertainty around the location and layout of the signalised intersection into the Nepean Highway. Now, this is the primary access point into the site. Over the last 2 or 3 months, we've been meeting with the Department of Transport, Vic Roads, to understand the preferred location and layout of that signalised intersection. Now, the location you can see here on the screen is pretty close to where it's going to be. We've had fairly advanced discussions with the Department of Transport, and they've confirmed that this is the location of that future intersection. Now, the intersection itself will be like a T intersection in its form, fully signalised. There will be a pedestrian crossing, which you can see there in the green line going across the Nepean Highway. It will be integrated obviously in with the slip lanes and not too dissimilar to probably that T intersection that you can see on the other side of the road at Turner Road there. And it will feed into the site via a fairly wide boulevard style entry road that will be anywhere between about 20 to 25 metres in width. Multiple lanes, median strip, footpaths on either side, nature strips, etc. Cycling lanes as well. Secondary access points at this stage, we're looking at, as Rob alluded to earlier, a secondary access point off what is currently a private road in Remington Drive, but also linking into Station Street or View Street to the north of the site. They will very much be secondary access points and principal access for vehicles will come from the Nepean Highway. The green circle represents that pedestrian access into Sir William Fry Reserve, which I mentioned in the previous slide. And we'll just look at the next slide, which is the strategic cycling corridor. And so this is very much a development plan overlay requirement, although it's certainly something that will be of great benefit not only to the Highett Gasworks but to the surrounding bicycle network and movement network. So at this stage we are looking to run that along the railway line, and it will have those green links that will cut through any buildings there to draw people into the site if they so desire. We'll just move on to the next theme. So how are we considering historic and cultural values? We've obviously got the chimney. Now, most of us would be aware that the chimney is the last remaining feature of the site's former life as a gas and fuel depot. And certainly for Development Victoria, embedding historical and cultural values into the landscape and the public open spaces is a key focus for us, which is why we really see that chimney as being a focal point of any central landscaping. So our role with regards to the chimney is we'll be looking to structurally restore the chimney just to ensure that it's obviously safe. And then we'll be looking to vest that with council to manage it and maintain it in perpetuity. We're also looking at ways to celebrate the chimney. We heard some great ideas at the first engagement session in terms of how we could look at doing that. We had some good feedback on there. And we also heard some from some residents how they really appreciate the top of the chimney from the bay. So we understand the importance of that, and we'll really be looking to celebrate it as well. There is a requirement for us, and it's something that we are looking at the moment, to ensure that we have sightlines of the chimney from both the Nepean Highway and Sir William Fry. Certainly from Sir William Fry Reserve, we see great opportunity in that. We certainly are exploring that. The Nepean Highway has its challenges, certainly, and indeed the location of the signalised intersection sort of moving along that boundary has thrown up a few challenges for us. But it's certainly something that is we're up for the challenge, and our design team is very, very much up for the challenge there as well. We've also commenced engaging with the traditional owners of the land, so the Boon Wurrung and the Bunurong people. And again, we do want this place to have a strong identity and be a place full of stories, and we're looking to see how we can incorporate some of those stories into the landscaping and the placemaking and the wayfinding. We'll just move on to the next thing. So this slide here is I guess a version of an earlier slide that Robert showed with the development plan overlay. Now, it references the building heights, and whilst the building form will be in accordance with this plan, we haven't yet landed on a general arrangement of the buildings. So this gives, I guess, an indicative location, and you do need to use a little bit of imagination at this stage, but it does give an idea of the sorts of heights and form that the buildings will take on around those access points and around the road network that we're proposing. We'll just move on to the next one. And so this really summarises basically everything that we've just gone through. So some of the key, these are, I guess, some of the knowns at this point in time. So we've obviously got the signalised intersection. We've got those secondary access points there as well. We've got that very safe, what will be a safe pedestrian crossing across the Nepean Highway. We've got active links through the site. We've got the strategic cycling corridor and other dedicated bike and pedestrian paths. We will have open space for rest and play. And as Robert mentioned earlier, we are exploring how to deliver best practice, sustainable design to improve the wellbeing of the residents and visitors. We're committed to delivering Green Star Communities rating tool to really try and add value into the local community. Additionally, we'll have the connections into Sir William Fry Reserve, celebrating the view lines to the chimney, and then the building heights will be in accordance with the development plan overlay. So on that note, I will pass back to Chris.
Well, great work. Thank you very much, Robert and Richard. And I'm sure you'd all agree there's a lot of information in there. So just a reminder that everything you've seen there in the slides will be available after tonight's webinar on the website, and we'll give a final recollection of where to go from that. in the time we have, and during the presentation, Richard and Robert, there's been lots of really interesting questions coming through, and so let's just spend the rest of today going through those. And I'm going to invite you both to be as succinct as possible when you're answering, so it means we can get through as many as we can. If we can answer them, yes. If we're not, we'll make a commitment to following up afterwards. So, Robert, seem to be some significant questions around structurally about big decisions you said at the start about the suburban rail loop, the SRL. So could you talk to us a little bit further about the question from, I think it was Ross, has made a point. Ross is a local resident, along the lines of this early plans seem to indicate that the reserve will be taken up significantly by suburban rail loop infrastructure. As what sort of impact does that have on the planning for the open space here on Highett Gasworks?
Thanks, Chris and Ross. That's the conversations with the SRL are very early stages, so that's something certainly that we'll be considering in the conversations that we'll have going forward, and hence that's why I've stated that the design needs to be flexible to consider those options. So at this stage, it's certainly something that's on the list of things to go through and something for consideration. And I just want to be clear that the outcome that we're seeking is the best outcome, and we have to broaden our boundary view about the whole precinct. Hence, we will be considering it on a more holistic view than we did where we were at in the previous engagement stage.
Janina also writes questions about, is there any knowledge about the suburban rail loop, about any digging or any works plans that we're aware of yet, Robert, that you can share with this group, or is that just simply too far advanced at this stage?
Well, we don't, and I believe that is pretty further down the track, pardon the pun there, but if that information, you'd probably need to request that from the suburban rail loop, because we don't have that at this stage anyway.
Okay, let's keep going. So in terms of urban design, Robert and Richard, Keely asks, a question about the height of the towers that might be proposed, and why are the 8-storey apartments being placed behind existing apartments and not at the end of the lots when they're not overlooked? And I guess it's, what's the rationale for where they are, Richard, and to minimise the visual impact and overlooking? There's a couple of questions coming through along those lines.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's important to note that the building heights have already been stipulated in the development plan overlay, which was a separate process carried out prior to Development Victoria's involvement. Having said that, though, I can certainly talk to the rationale behind some of those building heights, and to the northern end where you've got the 3 stories. That's obviously quite a sensitive interface to the north there, where you've got a lot of single and double-storey dwellings. I know there's potentially some 3-storey apartments that are under construction there at the moment. Hence why you've got the 3 levels there. The 8 levels in the centre. The idea being is that you sort of start on the outer areas of the site and sort of work into the height into the centre. There's 6 levels along the railway line. It's not an overly sensitive interface. Obviously, it's a railway line, and equally along the Nepean Highway, where you've got 6 levels there as well. And then the 6 levels down around the south of the site is not too dissimilar to the adjoining development, the Hallmark Vista apartment development there as well.
Richard, you've mentioned a fair bit tonight about open space and landscaping. Quite a few questions from Graham and Derek and others are wanting some just further detailed information about, you mentioned the 11.6% of the value of the site will be contributed to open space and infrastructure. Could you confirm whether the shared user path along the corridor is included in that overall, if you like, package of percentages? And also, how many connection points are there, or are you planning at the Sir William Fryer Reserve? It seems like that's a really important part of what we're getting through tonight through questions. Richard, could you share some light on that?
Yeah, sure. So the pedestrian and cycling paths within the development and along the rail corridor are included within the 11.6%, along with the playgrounds and those 2, the potential 2 neighbourhood open spaces as well. In terms of connections into Sir William Fryer Reserve, at this stage we're proposing 2. There's the strategic cycling corridor, which is they can be pedestrian-friendly environments, those cycling corridors, but sometimes they're not so, depending on who's riding on them and how quickly they need to get to work. And equally, we've got that secondary access there into William Fry, which will be the more principal access, I suppose, from St William Fry.
Yeah, terrific. That's right. So hopefully that's answered Derek and Graham's question about those pieces. But just to confirm that the 11.6% open space contribution includes both physical open space in terms of green space, or as Robert talked about, the jigsaw of what that looks like, but it also incorporates some contributions towards infrastructure, not just green spaces. Robert, could you just clarify what the 11.6% goes toward?
11.6% is a combination of area and also what goes on top of that public landscape area as well. So you can have large amounts of area and it might be lower quality landscaping, or it's smaller area and high quality landscaping. And that's generally the conversation that we will be having with council about which configuration are they after.
Robert, there's been a couple of questions about council's involvement as well. So whilst you're talking about council, can you talk to them about the level of engagement you've had with them, the new councillors? What's now the responsibility of council with regard your plans? We're jumping forward to the next steps, I guess, but perhaps if you just shed your light on what council's role in this process has been thus far and what next.
So with your question about the councillors, I haven't met any of them yet at this stage, and obviously there's been a new group that have been put through. With the conversation with council, we have been regular in conversations with the council officers. So their involvement has been relatively high at this stage, and that's certainly something that we undertake in all our projects, and we'll continue to do so going forward.
All right, now let's put our mind to traffic and transport connectivity. Lots of questions around there, Rob and Rich. Concerns that Highett Road is already at capacity, in terms of volume. That's a lot of locals. This is from an anonymous question, also Jack Noonan. So can you talk about how this development will change extended wait periods and progress from the railway station and Nepean Highway? The detailed traffic planning seems to be a real concern for Jack and Janina and Graham and a number of them about the size of the development. 150 apartments all coming out to Remington Drive beside the proposed access seems to be dangerous. So can you talk us through perhaps some of those more detailed planning, the stages of the planning? What are your thoughts of that detailed traffic management, Robert and Richard?
Yeah, I'll take that. With anything of this large scale and with its access points, there is a requirement to do a thorough review and have a traffic management plan with consideration of the density of the potential traffic use from the new development as well as the existing traffic as well. So we certainly take that very seriously, considering this site has probably got some additional challenges in that space. But it certainly is it's probably one of the biggest challenges on this site. I will not deny that, and it's something that we're very focused on. But we will go through that in a lot of detail, and all the information will become available as we move through the process.
Duncan asks, will southbound traffic on the Nepean Highway be able to access the site by turning across the median? And I guess that's what you mean by the full interchange. Could you describe perhaps your initial thinking of the intersection management, Richard, potentially?
Yeah, sure, Chris. Yeah, so yes, the intersection layout that's been proposed, southbound traffic will be able to turn right into the site. So they'll, as opposed to having to drive down and then do a U-turn and then come back around in, that will be signalised on both sides of the road, and so there will be right turns available directly into the gasworks site. Yes.
Nicholas Pullen has written in tonight, and thanks, Nicholas, for the questions and all of you for your questions. Perhaps I'll just read out his question. There is already great traffic congestion, both at peak and other times on Highett Road due to the rail level crossing. This includes the intersection from Nepean Highway. With another set of lights on Nepean Highway, but more importantly, the secondary access point at Station of View Street, the gridlocks will only get worse. Are there any contingency plans for this? So it's clear that this is a real issue for locals. I mean, how Robert, are you thinking it's both in the detailed planning, but also structurally you need to think through with council, of course, not just transport and Vic roads?
It's going to involve a lot of authority, Chris, and it's a great question. It's certainly, as I mentioned, it's probably the biggest challenge on the site. So there's conversation with VicTrack, there's conversation with council as well regarding that issue as well. So that's something certainly we'll be working through, and we're very, very mindful of that scenario.
Okay, so let's talk about bridges. Lawrence asks, will there be a bridge crossing over the railway line?
Another good question. At this stage, we're to investigate it, whether it's not necessarily a requirement of the development plan, but we'll certainly go through that review and talk again with council, and VicTrack are the major parties to talk through on that front. So without having those detailed conversations with those two other authorities on that particular issue, I probably can't say yes or no at this stage.
There's no sneak peeks you can share with us tonight, Robert?
No, there's nothing I can on that front.
Lawrence, I asked, sorry for that. I couldn't get any more than that. But also the bike paths and things. So anonymous contribution, but there's been a couple of them tonight, Robert and Richard, about the cycle path to the west of the site will be a horrible place. The concern that, somehow this place between buildings and the railway line, they'll have to put their back to the railway line because of the noise attenuation issues. Wouldn't it be better to put the bicycle path actually through the development rather than relegating it to a side thought along the railway line? Any thoughts on that, Richard or Robert, at this stage? And thanks for the question.
Yeah, and look, it is a great question, and it's certainly something that we are considering. Whilst we have shown the strategic cycling corridor against the railway line, and at this stage that seems like the most likely location for it. There are benefits to bringing it into the site, and then bringing it into that sort of main road, that secondary road that you can see there where the arrows are, and then coming back out the other end. Having said that, though, there are some very good examples of these cycling corridors around Melbourne with buildings against them. There's one up in Brunswick, up near Jules Station. It's a great example. And you've got the cycling corridor, and then you've got the building form. There's green. They've got green creepers and everything growing all up the sides of the building, and it is actually quite a nice environment to be riding through. So there are examples that have been done very well.
Yeah, okay. So job not done yet. So you're suggesting that some of the detailed design in terms of the architectural site layout may provide alternative routes for the corridor through the building area as you get more confident with the layout. Yeah, okay.
That's correct, Chris. And also, whilst we've got the strategic cycling corridor there along the railway line, there will still be cycling routes through the site. So if you were going 30 k's an hour and you were wanting to sort of get from A to B as quickly as possible, you might take the quick route along the railway line. If you're out for a family bike ride, you might go through the site. So there will be options there.
Okay, great. There's a couple, if we just take our mind back to some of the big urban design and greening sort of questions, quite a few of those still there. And Richard, Robbie, you talked about a place for all people, making it a connected and local place. Could you, this is a question that has come through from let me see who it was. Lawrence made this question. And the question is, what is planned for the safety of the elderly when they move around? I know it's a difficult question, but also something close to your heart, Robert, in terms of those who are in need of special space responses for the movement. Any thoughts on how that might be embedded into this development?
Yes, I guess one of the key requirements of the open space is to follow the dimension guidelines to ensure that there is big one is about the levels and also clarity on the floor context and the materials being used. I guess going into the conversation about the previous points that Richard made, that's one of the reasons why the bicycle path is along the rail line, because you can have those bike riders that want to get from A to B as fast as possible, which will then remove them away from the centre location where you have your elderly that want to be able to move around a bit slower. So that's certainly a key component of the design process. And safety, we know safety is a big issue. So, and I think I've highlighted that a few times, and that falls within that bracket.
And Graham's asked, I think, in terms of both safety, but also just can we just put an order of magnitude around the number of dwellings that might be imagined here, and therefore the amount of residents, individuals living here? Have you got an order of magnitude that I know there's obviously detailed work to do, but have you got a feeling for how big population-wise?
It's always the one that everyone likes to ask, and I think Graham may have asked that question previously, or someone asked it something similar. And I indicated that within that form that's available in that space, there is the potential for around 1,200 dwellings is potential within the massing. It doesn't mean that's what's going to be delivered, but that's the potential within the massing available under the development plan overlay. But there's a lot of consideration that need to be taken into account with regards to that. So I'm just saying that's probably one of the roundabouts number is the possibility, not that that's what will be the end number.
It's probably just to add to that as well, Rob and Chris, it's when we say that number of 1,200 dwellings, it will be a combination of 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartments, but also some attached townhouse dwellings as well. So there will be quite a broad range of housing, diverse housing.
Thanks, Richard. Rob, a couple of questions, and Janina and others have asked about, perhaps you could justify why you believe that the area along Nepean Highway should be a lower rise than the centre, and given that it's the high visual, what's the purpose of protecting the visual amenity of Nepean Highway, which is a major corridor, rather than protecting the visual amenity of surrounding areas? Could you perhaps just perhaps a little bit more thought on that for us?
I would think that's actually a good question. Naturally, you would do that, but I guess we have to work within the guidelines that have been given us by the DPO. I'm assuming that the reference has been made, the DPO being the development plan overlay. The reference has probably been made to the existing structures on either side, and that's what they've probably made the relationship between those two, and hence that they've intended to gradually increase the height to the middle of the site in lines of the theory that Richard outlined previously.
So just on the sight lines, the drawing there shows that's on screen at the moment, does talk about view lines to the chimney. Can you talk, a couple of questions came through about how the chimney might be managed in terms of, we don't want, a couple of comments, we don't want it to be covered in telecommunication towers, those things. So how might it be finished off in the end, and what sort of ideas might you have for its management and maintenance?
That's another good question. We don't intend to put telegraph or telephone. That would be a travesty, I would say, if we did something along those lines. We will undertake as required to do a structural review and to get it to a level which is safe. It will undergo a general maintenance plan, and at this stage, the intent is that it will be handed over to council to manage. But there obviously will need to be a management plan delivered upon the completion of the landscaping works around it.
Would you imagine the management plan cover such things as the artwork on the side, the maintenance management of the facility, of how it's maintained for the next 50 years? What would you call the management plan for a chimney? I've never seen such a thing, but I'm sure they exist.
Yeah, well, it would be inspected on a probably yearly basis to ensure any cracking was occurring, and not dissimilar to the investigations that we're going through at the moment to make sure it's safe. With regards to potential artwork, that would obviously need to be part of that review. Some of the ideas is trying to combine some of the Indigenous thinking around the chimney to see if we can actually have a combined piece of work that can celebrate both cultures. So yeah, Chris, there'll be a management plan at the end of that, I would say, and if that's followed, then I'm sure that it will still be a safe feature.
You'd be open for suggestions, though, on how to do it over time, I guess. Thanks. Look, time's ticking away. It's now 5 to 7, but I guess traffic and transport, as you might imagine, it's coming back again and again tonight. And I think there's something you might be able to just share our thoughts on. And you did talk about the detailed traffic management planning for the site, and I know there's more work to be done, but there seems to be a lot of concerns. Derek from Pennyvale and others are talking about the concern about the way you've structured the road network. It seems like there's an opportunity for rat runs, sneaking through the site avoiding major intersections. What's your response to that? And that's a very genuine concern for many people, and particularly those living in the adjoining established neighbourhood areas. Robert and Richard, what's your response, and how does your initial thinking minimise that opportunity?
A good question. It's probably something that we would need to, certainly something that our traffic engineers will be advising us on. There'll be a lot of analysis that would get done on traffic movements, typical traffic movements, but certainly we do see that access on the Nepean highways being the primary access point. And very much the two other points are certainly secondary. By rat run, I would assume the reference there is potentially people coming possibly down Remington Drive in the site to miss a couple of lights to then get up onto Highett Road.
Presumably, yes. I think that might be
I'm presuming that's the assumption. Which look, I guess indeed is a possibility. Although we would need to do some further analysis to look at the likelihood of that actually occurring.
Yeah, indeed. Look, I think there's been some really, really good questions tonight, and sadly we won't get through them all, but I hope we had a good flavour for what's coming through. In the time we have available, I just perhaps also like to suggest to Robert and Richard, are there any key observations you took from the questions tonight? Any next steps that you think are really important before we go to the formal sort of timing and next steps, Robert? Any reflections on what you've heard from coming through from the webinar?
It's probably reiterated the importance of the traffic and congestion question. The rat race question is a good one, and something we'll certainly review in more detail. We probably haven't gone to that level at this stage, but yeah, I just reinforce that traffic is certainly the biggest challenge here, and we will need to work hard to find solutions. Yeah,
terrific. Well, firstly, thank you, Richard Coffey, Development Director, Development Manager, and Robert Stepanek from Development Victoria for being with us tonight. I think it's been really, really useful. Before we leave, I'd just like to talk you through some of the next steps. In terms of tonight, so for those who weren't able to see us or stay with us, and for those who know others who had to leave or for whatever reason couldn't attend tonight, there is a recording of tonight, so that will be online or either tonight or Saturday's forum. That will be online at the next week or thereabouts. You can read the full engagement report. Robert talked about the QR code there. So if you're really interested in trying something out, you can get your mobile phone out now. You can put your camera on. You can hover your camera over the QR code, and that will take you to a website, and you can go to the website. Look, that might be a bit complex for some people. It was for me until about a year ago. Thanks, Robert. You were 6 months. I'm an early adopter 12 months ago. But either way, you can go to the Development Victoria website and it's all there. And of course, if you need to have a conversation or find out more information as a result of tonight, or it's stimulated some questions you may have that weren't asked, do get in contact with the team at highett.gw@development.gov.au. Or if you don't do that school of thinking and you'd like to have a bit of a conversation, call the phone number that's there.